Good afternoon and welcome back, ladies, gents and Pikachus. Welcome back to the show. Hope you're having a good day. And I hope you have already eaten and digested your lunch. Because I want to talk to you about sodomy, which is kind of a bit of an icky subject. So like I say, hopefully you have eaten your lunch or you're not planning to eat one in the next half an hour. So the reason I thought I'd bring this up, one of my good friends came to me with a problem. And she is going to a new church and it was discussing homosexuality. How do they teach homosexuality? What do they say about homosexuality? What do they expect her to bow to and accept and teach her children if she's going to go to this church? As we know, God in his wisdom and his greatness has given us the Bible, and inside the Bible is the words, sodomy is an abomination of the soul. It's one of the worst things you can do. I happen to think this is true. But whether I think it's true or not doesn't really matter, because God says it's true, and I believe that God is true. So I accept it. Now it just so happens I do accept that anyway, and I do personally think that. My experience of the world teaches me that this is true, and the reasons for it being true are also true. It's not just a silly made up thing. This is not something God is doing because he wants to interfere with the sex lives of people. It's nothing to do with that. It's because it is a sin, and sin leads to more sin, and enough sins will make the entire world miserable and a worse place in general. So then I think to myself, why do people even bother arguing this? For instance, if your son comes to you at the age of 6 and says, "Mum and Dad, I'm a 6-year-old boy, I think I'm gay," should you encourage that? Should you say, "Well done, Jimmy, the 6-year-old, you're now gay. Congratulations, go marry a man"? Do you think that's the best thing for that 6-year-old? Do you think it's the best thing for your family? Do you think it's best for the world, for your family, or for that 6-year-old? Or do you think the reason why God is telling you absolutely do everything you can to prevent that is for a good reason? And that your personal feelings, whichever way you swing on that issue, should be ignored and you should apply God's wisdom? Or let's turn it around and say it's not gayness. You've got a 6-year-old boy and he comes to you and says, "Mum and Dad, Jimmy the 6-year-old boy is a rapist. Naturally a rapist. He was born a rapist, he's always going to be a rapist. It's his right as a human being to be a rapist." Would you encourage that? What about if he was 30 years old and he brought home a 13-year-old girl and said, "We're in love. It's totally fine and natural. Just because people don't like it, they're just discriminatory"? Would you be encouraging of that? Or if you turn it round, if you have the 13-year-old girl and she brought back a 30-year-old man and said they're in love, they're going to get married, would you sanction that? Let's turn the dial down slightly. What about if you have a son who is 15 and he comes to you and says, "Mum and Dad, I have something to tell you. I'm a career thief and a drug dealer. It's totally fine. Even though it's against the law of the land and you guys might not like it, it's my personality to be a thief and a drug dealer, so I'm going to do it," says your son. Do you accept it and encourage that? Or do you take a stand and say, "No, I'm standing on God's wisdom, God's truth, and I'm going to put my foot down and say, don't steal, don't deal drugs, don't destroy your brothers, don't be sinful, because it's wrong"? I clearly think that is the way that you should approach things. So, in conclusion, why is God's truth and wisdom unassailable by human truth and wisdom? Ultimately, it's because God knows better than us, and as society will show us if we only look, humans make lots of errors and mistakes, chasing their base desires, their instincts for pleasure, carnal lusts and power or temporary glory, comfort, whatever it be. For instance, we had in Britain quite recently, we have a guy called Philip Schofield. Many of you may have heard of him. Philip Schofield, TV presenter, 59 years old or something like that now, 58 years old. He had a 14-year-old intern, an extra, who appeared in some of his TV shows, who he specifically picked out of a school he was sponsoring. So before he knew this lad, I think his name was Philip McGreevy, He was going around schools because he's a famous TV star, and he was giving these schools lots of money for books and for gym equipment, and he was sponsoring the kids to go on holiday, and he was doing all kinds of charitable stuff. And even though the teachers saw him interfacing with the children in a kind of suspicious fashion, they said, but he's giving us all this money, he's sponsoring all these kids, the actual balance of things is he's good, we'll let him do it. And then he chooses out this particular kid, McGreevy, to be one of his extras. And then he rushes him through the selection process, and that kid is now working for him. A few years later, he starts sleeping with him. Is that okay? Before you answer, know the rest of the story. Philip Schofield is married and has 3 daughters. Is it okay that he has a wife and 3 daughters and is doing that? How does the situation of that come about? It's because when he was a child, nobody had the good sense to pull him to one side and say, Philip, regardless of how you feel now, regardless of your carnal, lustful nature and your desires, the fact that you want to have sex with a man now, if that is what you want, if you knew what was going to happen to you over the next 58 years, that you were going to have to lie to cover it up, then you were going to have to take a wife to cover up that lie, then you were going to have 3 daughters to convince your wife that you were actually in love with her so that you could cover up the original lie to cover up the original gayness, then you were going to run that down the track for 58 years and get caught, and the end result was going to be you lose your job, your career is over, the public now hate you, you are in consternation with the law, your wife will never speak to you again and is now divorced, and your 3 daughters will never recover from the trauma that they suffered at your hands. All of this is all of that 58 years worth of disgusting sin and horrible treatment of the women in your family, your wife and daughters, not to mention the fact that you have shamed your fans and your employer, and you are now depressed and looking for a way out, you can't show your face in public. Is all of that worth satisfying a temporary sexual desire, a lust, which you taught yourself to have, rather than teaching yourself to not have it and doing something else? Is it worth it? Because nobody had the good sense to pull Philip Schofield to one side when he was a young lad and have that conversation with him, the 58 years of sin that followed were completely available to him. And even though he was quite happy getting away with it, and the law was patting him on the head and saying, yeah, you can be gay, you can get married, you can sodomize, you can do whatever you like, it's fine, diversity, cool. Tell that to his wife and his 3 daughters today, and guess what you'll get? You'll get a fist. So, in conclusion, God says sodomy is bad, God says rape is bad, God says murder and thieving and adulterating, coveting, being jealous and disrespecting thy mother and father, taking the Lord's name in vain are all bad sins. We should never do them under any circumstance, neither should we encourage other people to do them or allow them in church or school. Maybe God knows best. And for the sake of our politics or our popularity or patting people we like on the head and allowing for their sins, we should actually stick to God's commands. And we should accept his wisdom is greater than ours. And then we can clean this world up and remove the sin from this society so that we can all be happier, safer, and better off in general, regardless of the fact that Philip Schofield wants to have sex with a man. Now watch the hateful comments flood in, but I'm going to stand by that. And the proof is this. No matter how I feel, now or in the past, when I was a small boy and I saw 2 men kissing in the street, I didn't know what it was, but something inside me felt very, very sick. And I was like, I had a sickness response and I was confused. And I didn't know why they were doing it. And I asked my mum and dad what I saw. And you know what they said to me? They said, you're too young to know. That's the correct thing to do, because I was too young to know. But the fact is, because it's not against the law, that's okay for them to do. And because it wasn't against the law for Phil Schofield, it was okay for him to do. And the reason it's not against the law is because God's law is for the individual, not for the state. And so therefore, if you want to follow God's law and avoid sin, then you will accept God's law as the truth of your life. Whether or not it's in the law of the country, whether or not it agrees with your politics, you will elect and make the good judgment decision that despite the fact that you don't always agree with God's law, you don't always understand and accept God's wisdom is greater than your wisdom at all and any time of the day. And if you are smart and you want your wisdom to increase and your sins to decrease, if you want to be happier and your welfare to increase, then regardless of your politics or how popular it makes you, you will stand on the scripture and nothing else. Therefore, sodomy is an abomination, which means even though you accept it because it's in the law, you don't accept it in your personal private life, and you certainly don't let your children think it's okay. So, bit of a hard-hitting one this time, I feel, but I'm a Christian. I'm going to stand on that. Plus, as I said, I feel like that is right. That's the end of this video. So, hope you've enjoyed that and you learned something. God bless you all. And I'll see you lovely people in the next one. Bye now. Being a good Christian, then, is not about having the correct politics or being patted on the head and gaining popularity. It's about discerning truth and sticking to the wisdom that God has given you. So, that's the end of this video. God bless you all. Have a lovely day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.